So let's talk about some actionable steps here. Step one, let's say that I want to get my memoir, or not memoir, let's say I want to get my story out there. What should I do first? After I've already decided that it's worth telling, and I've done my brain dump. What now?
What now? Well, there's a couple of avenues that I would recommend for new authors, and the easiest one is to record yourself.
Hmm.
People. One of the other blocks that people have or challenges is that they say, "Oh, I'm not a good writer," or "I don't type very fast," or "I can't, I can read my handwriting if I write it out." I
Hmm.
always recommend to people to record themselves speaking because that's when number one, the truth comes out, right? It's much easier and faster to go from brain to mouth than
Hmm.
brain to hand. So I always recommend to my clients to record themselves speaking, which can be transcribed later into words on paper
Hmm.
and then edited. So, the first step once they decide to take that leap of faith and to start the process, and then once they do their brain dump, is to literally just start speaking. And there's a million apps and tools out there now that can do that. And it's really a great way to get the information out. And it does help, I find, people with the block. When they
Hmm.
sit, they're staring at that blank sheet on their computer and they go, where do I start? Just start talking.
Start talking.
Start talking. Yep.
Wow. And do you how far should they go? Should they try to go all the way from beginning to end?
No, no, I would recommend doing it. It's going to be a long process, and a lot of the talking will be stuff that doesn't make any sense or is not relevant to the story, and those they get cut out later on. But the true self, I feel like, comes out when people just talk, and but talk in with intention, right? So let's say your
Hmm.
brain dump reveals that you want to talk about your career. Well, then set aside time that in this session you would talk about your career and your years or
Hmm.
your college education. And then maybe, a little while or a day or so later, then talk about another topic. But I wouldn't try to do it all at one time because then feelings and emotions and thoughts get too jumbled because you're trying to get it all out in one session
Hmm.
versus taking it in small bites.
So do you have a system for doing that? Like how would they organize all that? It seems like it could get messy very quick.
Yeah, it could get messy very, very quickly. The key to organizing is doing it in groups, meaning um, doing it like today you're going to talk about um, your childhood, right? And then when you have that audio file, then you call that file your childhood, and that becomes a chapter, right? So I would
Hmm.
recommend doing them kind of broken down into chapters, which can be moved around and changed later on. But the best way to do that is by doing it as chapters.
And then you just kind of put all those into a folder.
You got it.
Okay. Um, do you? I know a lot of authors like to do mind mapping. Do you feel like that helps?
I'm not familiar with it, honestly. So, if you could tell me a little bit about what you're referring to, I can certainly comment.
Oh, okay. So mind mapping is where you kind of put an idea that you're thinking about, and then you surround it with ideas that are related to it, and then for each of those, you surround them with ideas related to that. And so that's where
Yeah.
my mind first jumped to when you talked about the audio thing. I was like, oh, that's
Y-
kind of like audio mind mapping
Yes.
almost.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's a great way to call it. I just didn't call it that, but yes, it's the same thing.
Oh, okay. um, And then, okay, so I can already kind of see this coming together. You've got your idea for a story. You do your brain dump to kind of get an idea about what is it at its core. What are you trying? What story are you trying to tell? You've identified who you think is going to be your audience, whether it's your family or a wider audience. You found out, okay, I'm trying to tell a story about faith, so maybe my audience is a faith-based audience. So these are the things that are going to be most interesting to them. And then you start doing your audio recordings, diving into the different topics, working out your chapters. Um, let's see, what's next after that? I guess then you would try to just start editing it, or am I missing a step here?
No, well, organization is, although you've put them now in your audio files into chapters, now you have to put it all together, right? And that's where
Okay.
the kind of the organization comes in. And at that point, it's a good idea to have an outline to follow. Yes, you've got all these great stories and this information, but you need to be able to say, okay, this is the order that I want it in. Maybe you want it to jump around between time periods in your life, or do you want it chronologically? But that's the time to start organizing to determine what order do I want all of this in, because that will also determine the flow of it, right? Although
Hmm.
there's lots of stories, it needs to be readable for an audience. It needs to make sense. So just having
Hmm.
like all of these chapters dumped together isn't going to help. But now it's a matter of putting it together so that it flows, it's organized, and that's where an outline would come in. Once you have
Okay.
the outline, then I would suggest then you could put the chapters in order, and then the editing would begin. And the editing would take out a lot of those little comments or details that you don't that you we talked about before that are not may not be
Sure.
relevant. It takes out all of those things that we all say, those connectors, right? Those
Yeah.
and uhs, which a recording will capture, of course. But um exactly. And that's the time to take all of those things out. So there is some editing involved. And then at that point, and once the editing is done, then you see, wow, I really have a story. And then it gets down to the next step would be um, finalizing the editing. And the last part of the editing is for grammar and punctuation and spelling and all of those things to make it really into a finished
Hmm.
product.